Welcome to the Lindamood-Bell radio podcast. I'm your host, Dave Hungerford, and I want to let you know that Lindamood-Bell has a new online learning community for teachers who take our workshops. It's called the Imagery Language Connection. Subscribe, and you'll gain access to a library of resources for teaching with the Seeing Stars or Visualizing and Verbalizing programs. Attend live webinar sessions with our instruction experts and refine your skills at your own pace with e-learning courses, all included. We want you to keep learning with us. Find the Imagery Language Connection at lindamoodbell.com. Welcome to Lindamood-Bell Radio, a podcast where we explore topics in literacy and learning. I'm your host, Dave Hungerford, Lindamood-Bell's Director of Visual Media. Today, I'm talking with George Welsh, the Superintendent of the Canyon City School District in Colorado. In 2014, he was named the Colorado Superintendent of the Year after dramatically changing the literacy rates for a low-performing, high-poverty school district. George, welcome to Lindamood-Bell Radio.
How are you doing, Dave?
I'm great, thank you. I want to ask a little bit about reading proficiency rates. I know literacy has been a big concern of yours over the years as an educator. Why have they remained stagnant?
Well, I think there's a really simple answer there, sort of two-pronged. One is most, if not all, teacher preparation programs really don't get into the science of how you support a child in growing and reading. It still looks in 2018 like it looked in about 1950. And that is, you read to a kid, you introduce them some basic phonics, and when you get to a point where a kid is exhibiting a significant reading deficiency, guess what you do? You pull them out of a regular education setting, maybe have them not go to PE or science or social studies, and you put them in a small group and you do the same exact thing in a small group that you were doing with them in a large group that clearly hasn't been working for them.
Tell me a little bit about the district that you're at now for people that don't know Canyon City.
Sure. Canyon City is a community of about 20,000 people tucked up against the east side of the Rocky Mountains in the Arkansas River Valley. We have beautiful mountains with lots of geological features and including pretty cool fossils to be found around here and great river recreation. We also just happen to be sort of like the prison capital of Colorado as well. We have several federal and state level prisons in our community. Our school district has about 3,800 kids. We do have a pretty high poverty rate at the elementary level that hovers mid-60s, about 65%. K-12, our poverty rate is about 55%.
Yeah, and how about the reading proficiency rates there? What are they?
Well, so, I guess what you might ask yourself is, have we been doing well enough? And my observation, and one thing cool that Colorado has going on is they publish annual school performance frameworks, which is, you might consider it a report card for schools. And when I accepted the job in around this time of year, in fact, back in 2015, part of the reason I wanted to come to Canyon City is I saw the similar pattern in terms of student achievement accomplishment in reading, as well as other subject areas that I observed in my former district, which was Center in the San Luis Valley. And that means that on average we were growing at the upper 30th to lower 40th percentile compared to all other students in Colorado. And something that was striking to me is certainly we have some socioeconomic challenges, but not nearly as large as we had when I was in center. Over 90% school poverty rate. In center, we also had about a 50% English language learner rate, and we had a 95% minority population. Well, Canyon City has fewer kids in a 3,800 student district who are English language learners than we had in an average kindergarten class each year at center. And our Anglo population is upwards of 95%, and our minority population makes up the rest. So very different demographic, but as far as I was concerned, seeing a place that with the right mix of support could really turn low annual student growth in reading, in writing, and in math, as well as other subject areas. I felt like there's a good possibility we could boost those to greater than average growth in the state.
And do you have to sort of attack the challenge differently for a high minority district versus one that is much lower percentage minority students?
Yes, because what you're dealing with is lack of vocabulary generally, although we've learned some interesting things in comparison between Center and Canyon City, or I would say. For Center, the issue was vocabulary, definitely English vocabulary, because we had so many English language learners. And so in terms of Lindamood-Bell techniques, what was our most successful tool in Center was the visualizing and verbalizing. We had kids who might hear a common word to us. I like to use the word penguin, for example. When I say penguin, an image just popped into your head, right? Yep. When you say that to an English language learner kid, or when the English language learner kid sounds that out phonetically, it may be nothing pops into their head. They have nothing to attach to that. And so interventions that we used in Center in the form of visualizing and verbalizing really helped kids grow in their vocabulary, which then helped them with their comprehension. Sort of an interesting situation we're finding in Canyon City is we actually have kids who have pretty good vocabularies, and I don't know if that's I don't feel like it's too dependent on poverty. They have parents who speak to them a lot. They are exposed to all kinds of media that helps grow their vocabulary. They master the English language. The biggest struggle we've had with kids in Canyon City is their ability to decode. And so the work we do in regards to Lindamood-Bell interventions with our kids here in Canyon City that's been the most successful so far is the Seeing Stars process, where we're teaching kids to decode and sound out words. And once a kid can take that jumble of letters and make them sound like something they've heard before, I've literally seen some statistics we have where we've had kids reading at the 9th percentile, and in the course of about 100 hours of intervention have jumped to the 90th percentile because the vocabulary was there. They just weren't able to decode the words.
Wow, that's fantastic. Let me ask you for a minute about the project in Center. We as Lindamood-Bell were involved heavily with you. You received a turnaround grant that looked at centers being one of the lowest performing districts in the state. You had funds to help make a change there. Maybe you can describe that project on the whole briefly, if you would.
Yeah, sure. And it was actually specific to Haskin Elementary School. Bottom 5% single school performer in the state of Colorado back in 2010. What I like to point out is just by giving your kids a test, the annual state tests, you can earn 25 points on a 100-point accreditation scale. Haskin Elementary School in 2010 earned 25.3 points. That's how bad testing results were, and all the other indicators that's how bad growth and status performance, overall achievement was at Haskin Elementary School.
So it's pretty much equivalent to just filling out your name and the date.
Pretty much, yeah. We apparently earned 0.3 points elsewhere. So that qualified us for a race to the top is what was actually the impetus on this turnaround school grant in Colorado. And what we received was about $1.5 million for a school of about 300 kids to be spent over 3 years. And what you have to do is you have to identify your root cause issues for why you're performing that way, and certainly a lot of them, but the key ones we identified were we'd been in like a 6-year process of creating curriculum, and we never finalized anything, and so we it was clear we didn't have a guaranteed and viable curriculum, and then we also, whether it was at the teacher level, more so at the administrator level, where administrators did not hold teachers accountable for teaching to that guaranteed and viable curriculum, which we didn't have anyway. We needed some support there. But another root cause we found was on the reading instruction front. It was clear a tough situation some struggling schools get into is to bounce from one grant opportunity to the next, because your hope is by getting extra resources, training, and support that you might learn a new way to do something, and if you implement that in your school or school district, that you will find some kind of growth. And I don't think I can give you the alphabet soup of all the different grants we had been involved in up to that time at Haskin Elementary School. One was like the Colorado Reading Excellency Act, CREA. There was Read to Achieve. There's folks might remember Reading First. And at any rate, over the course of about 8 years of different grants coming in and being taught different ways to address student reading, we had a hodgepodge of philosophies, styles, ways that teachers would teach a kid reading. And so a kid going from kinder to first to second to third and so on would get confused because different teachers handled it in a different way. And so we wanted to address two things: the curriculum and the leadership to support the effective instruction of that, and to address the reading issue. And we partnered with Lindamood-Bell at that time to be our main support for teaching us comprehensively how to teach reading in the classroom setting, in the intervention setting as well, how to measure student growth, how to react to their changing needs, and how to finally move that dial.
Let me ask you, when you get a hodgepodge of instructional techniques like that, teachers become married to what's a favorite for them. They get in the comfort zone. How did you get people to yet again change their teaching and instructional practices?
Well, the great thing about being a bottom 5% performer in a state is you're able to say, well, obviously what we've been doing hasn't been working. Let's try doing something different. And the leverage that we were given through the turnaround grant process to say, we're all going to do this, we're all in it together, and we're going to do it with fidelity was a gigantic help. And, I think I would want to reflect as to the other things we had attempted at the time. If we'd done those with as much fidelity, would we have received as much growth? And my answer to you is that we generally did those things with fidelity, but we never were able to get the dial to move, because I believe each of those processes, those strategies, was really more about doing what you were doing in the classroom already that achieved the result that you got, and just doing it in smaller group or even one-on-one. And certainly more of the same has some effect, but it does not solve the problem. And what we were able to do through our partnership with Lindamood-Bell was, the way I like to describe it, is like a doctor diagnosing symptoms you have and actually addressing those symptoms. If your knee hurts, an ice pack on your head is probably not the answer. But we were putting ice packs on all kids' heads when they had some symptoms that weren't indicative of that's what the best treatment would be. And the fantastic part of Lindamood-Bell process is that you really identify whether a child's issue is decoding, the dyslexia end of the spectrum, or if it's the comprehension, more like visualizing, making sense of the words in your brain, which the hyperlexia end of the spectrum.
And the state test doesn't do that, right? The state test doesn't let you know if it's a decoding or...
No, there's no result you get in the state test that says this kid can't decode, or this kid... anyone who's ever tried to teach reading can relate to this anecdote. You put a paragraph in front of a kid that is semi-challenging. They read it out loud to you, and they read it perfectly, every word's said correctly, and then you ask them questions about it, and then you get a blank stare. There's no comprehension. Well, that's a kid who clearly can decode words. Phonics is not an issue. Decoding's not an issue. The problem is they're lacking vocabulary to understand what those words are saying. Then by the same token, you can take another kid and ask them to read that paragraph, and it'd take them like a half an hour, right? Because they're stumbling over every word. Yet if you read it out loud to them and then asked them a few questions about it, they get it like that, because they have the vocabulary. They can comprehend the words once said to them clearly, but they can't decode. And I'm sorry, most efforts to improve the lot for kids who are struggling with reading don't distinguish between those two issues. And obviously some kids have both issues. And the way we work it when we use the Lindamood-Bell process is, well, if you don't have a strong vocabulary and you can't decode, we better start with decoding so that you can make the words make sense, and then you can start understanding the words.
So how did things in center end up?
I'd like to share that with you a couple of ways. So let's just focus on reading first. We went from like 34th, 35th percentile growth on an annual basis. This means we're horrible, and we're sustaining that. And our goal was to get to 50th percentile growth on an annual basis, because that could mean that we're kind of horrible, but at least we're getting a year's growth in a year's time. Within our first year, we went from the 34th percentile to the 49th percentile at Haskin Elementary School in reading growth. And the second year, we went up to something like the 58th percentile. And then for the 2 years I remained there in center, we kept our reading growth at about the 58th percentile. And what did that look like compared to, state average performance? Well, we were at about 20% proficiency in reading at the time we began our turnaround grant, and we'd had a flatline performance of that, give or take 4 points, for about 4 or 5 years running.
20%.
20% proficiency. At the end of the first year, we were up like 44% proficiency. At the end of the second year, we were at 76 or 77% proficiency on average, third, fourth, and fifth grade. State average, and state average is not 90% poverty, 50% English language learner, and 95% minority population. But state average, Colorado state average proficiency was 75%. And so we actually, maybe it wouldn't be a great goal for some schools, but we got above state average performance with the population we were dealing with. And we sustained that for the 2 years I was there beyond that. There's here. How about a secondary effect on that? All we did in terms of addressing our math deficiencies was we adopted a guaranteed and viable curriculum, which was helpful, and we were very specific about the expectations of how things were taught, and that the curriculum itself was taught. However, we saw even greater growth in math, and I attribute it to, guess what, the fact that kids could read the questions on the test.
And maybe the comprehension was improved as well.
Absolutely. Because as we were seeing for many years in our schools, kids could manipulate the numbers, but when put into a word problem and not being able to comprehend that, they weren't being successful.
Well, that sort of change, I'm sure you saw make an effect in individual kids' lives. When you can comprehend 2 or 3 times better than you had before, that's going to make a visible difference.
There's Dave, it's even more to it than you can imagine. You take kids who are very reserved and not willing to speak out in class, and suddenly they become active participants. And you take kids who've been masking their deficiencies by acting out with their behavior, and they become model students. And when you address a kid's struggle to read, you transform their life.
I was lucky enough to go there and make a short couple of documentaries that are on the Lindamood-Bell YouTube page, and met some of those kids that had been in trouble and were now out of trouble, and they were attributing it to their better academic skills and abilities.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me adding, as that school performance framework system that we scored 25.3 points on in 2010, the levels, and we were a turnaround school, bottom 5%. We advanced in 1 year to a priority improvement school. That's the next level up, and we were in we had about 38 points on our school performance framework that year. The second year we actually just bypassed improvement and went to performance, which is the highest accreditation rating a school can achieve in Colorado, and we were scoring between 60 and 70 points on that school performance framework measure in Colorado for the last 3 years I was there.
And that's a very rural school in San Luis Valley. It's beautiful, set on the western slopes of the Rockies. Very blue-collar farming town, I believe, right?
High immigrant population, farming is the industry. Most people either work on a farm or something related to the farm, or some business that's in place because there's farms all around.
Good spot. And you undoubtedly have different challenges now in Canyon City.
Yeah.
What sort of implementations do you have and programs do you have in place now that are on your desk?
So what I wasn't able to get, I arrived in Canyon City in July 2015. And one other story about Center, by the way, there's school level accreditation and there's district level accreditation. And Center School District in 2010 was a priority improvement school district on the district performance framework. Its accreditation status was on a 5-year clock that when it gets timed out, the state can come in and require some major changes against the will of the school board and administration and local population. Thanks to the good work we did at Haskin Elementary, which quite frankly rubbed off to the middle school level, and some other stuff that we did, we went from priority improvement to full-blown accreditation in Center by, I believe it was fall of 2014. We were the highest accredited school district in Colorado with the highest poverty population. If you understand that in reflecting on the and we didn't get scored any differently than a school district that only had 10% poverty, but we achieved full accreditation, and so it not only affected our elementary school and its individual performance, but it affected the district. So I come into a school district in 2015 that its last accreditation as a district was priority improvement. And first year, I don't have the money, the resources, anything to bring in the extra reading supports. But year two, at the end of year one, we were able to access a grant called Colorado's Early Literacy Grant. And that allowed us to adopt new materials, align our curriculum to current standards in reading, and to bring in Lindamood-Bell intervention processes. And larger district than I was dealing with in Center, and so our first target was Title I and special education teachers. We trained them up. We had them teach summer academy, and then we have done 90-minute interventions for as many kids as we can run through the processes all during that first year. And in that first year, as the anecdote we saw kids grow from below 10th percentile reading comprehension to above 90th. Based on that 2016-17 test cycle result, moved up from improvement to full accreditation as a school district, and for the first time, our school district was able to achieve greater than 50th percentile growth in reading. And that, by the way, measures the K-12 system, but just at the entire elementary composite at that point, we in 1 year, by the way, we went from, I believe it was 44th percentile reading growth to 52nd. So quite a boost, and that was only year one. And what we did last summer is we trained more staff in Lindamood-Bell interventions. And therefore we were able to address the needs of more kids. We ran a second summer academy to address our most needy kids. We're able to offer the intervention services to more children, and we are starting to see teachers starting to use some of the techniques as they just teach reading regularly during their school day. We're just beginning the 2018 test cycle, and by about August we'll get our second year results. And my full expectation, Dave, is they'll look a lot like the second year results we got in center, and that'll be yet another boost. By the way, one of the you had to drill down into our data from last year's testing cycle. One of the greatest boosts we got in reading growth, which convinced my Director of Instruction, Adam Hartman, that we truly are on the right track. He didn't have my experience in center, was the gigantic growth we showed in special education reading, which he'd been in this district quite a while and had never seen anything like it. And remember, we trained special education staff, and we were mainly addressing the needs of special education students. And talk about a hard needle to move, Reason why a kid ends up in special education is very typically because they struggle with the ability to read.
Well, that's great to hear some stories, rare stories of successes in school districts that are that have the breadth that both of those sites do. You have, I know, been recognized for your tech savvy and your blog. Where could people go to if they wanted to follow up on some of how your district's doing?
Kind of the sort of a funny situation is I spent I was 18 years as superintendent in center. I would like to be forgiven for the first 13 because I did some of my worst superintending ever. Those last 5 years, thanks to the things we learned through our turnaround grant, were transformational. That community changed. We even along the process were able to build a new school, employ a one-to-one device program, all that kind of stuff. And in 2014, I was Colorado Superintendent of the Year. And I was also one of eSchool News' Tech Savvy Superintendents of the Year. I hung those plaques on the wall in my office in center, and when I packed them up and came to Canyon City Schools, I left them in a box because, what have you done for me lately? I don't believe an award like Superintendent of the Year is something you ever earn twice, not that I'm looking to. But what I've got to say, Dave, is the work I'm doing here in Canyon City, scaling it up from a 700 student district to a 3,800 student district, and seeing people buy into your vision and understand that there is a science to teaching kids to read, as well as other systems we're putting in place. I've never done better work as a superintendent than I'm doing right now in my 21st year in the field. What's wonderful is what works in a community like Center works in a community like Canyon City. It just maybe takes a few more resources and a little bit more to scale up, but it's extremely rewarding to see. We're fully accredited. We're in the process possibly of building 2 new schools. We have good community support behind us. We passed an override election to give us, guess what, enough money to implement a one-to-one device program, and so things are headed in the right direction.
That's fantastic. There's so much cynicism surrounding our schools a lot of times. It's in education, we all know, is so important that it's really good to hear stories like this. And so thank you for your time.
Thanks a bunch for reaching out. It's nice once in a while to get to reflect on where you've been and celebrate. We too often don't do that.
Thank you for listening to Lindamood-Bell Radio. I hope you will listen to more episodes and subscribe. You can also follow Lindamood-Bell on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. For Lindamood-Bell Radio, I'm Dave Hungerford saying goodbye.